The visual novel translation scene has grown quite a lot over the years. The last 5 years in particular saw a crazy uptick in available visual novels with an English translation. Sadly, there have been some translation projects, both fan translations and official translations, that have either become dropped projects or didn't work out for whatever reason. In this video, I'm going to be covering 10 notable visual novel English translations that did not pan out. I'm mostly not going to include things that have a full readable English translation in some form, or has at least a kinda guaranteed translation that's upcoming. So for example, I'm not going to include Front Wing's translation of Shar no Kuni on this list, tempting as it is to include. The first visual novel I'll talk about is Ubisoft's Tenshin Ranman, originally going to be translated by Sekai Project. Tenshin Ranman is one of Ubisoft's older and most popular titles, being one of the few to get a console port, specifically on the PSP. Sekai Project got really close to releasing it, then it eventually got put into what they call the Icebox. Basically, it's a list of Sekai Project titles that were essentially infinitely delayed. While Nekonyan was able to get Ubisoft licenses and actually release them, they've stuck to basically all the modern recent ones, so that means Tenshin Ranman, one of Ubisoft's older classics, remain untranslated to this day. I'll talk about one more Ubisoft title, this time one of the more modern titles in Amairo Islenauts. Amairo Islenauts is currently the one modern-ish Ubisoft title to not have a full translation released or announced. Nobleworks, Dracu Riot, and Sound of a Witch have translations, and anything from Senran Banka onwards has one as well. But Amairo Islenauts is kind of that black sheep in the middle, and from what I see, people tend to not like this Ubisoft visual novel as much as the others with translations anyway. That said, there was a fan translation that got started on Fua Novel around when Sekai Project initially picked up Tenshin Ranman and Dracu Riot. This group did release a partial patch that translates most of the common route, but it seems like the translation stopped once Nekonyan got the Ubisoft licenses and released Sabado the Witch. Next, I'm going to be talking about the 18+ patch for Miazora or A Sky Full of Stars. Moe Novel, the main English publisher and translator of pull-top titles, always releases their titles without an official way to get the original 18+ content. If My Hearted Wings or Kono Sora eventually got an 18+ fan patch, being one of the most looked forward to visual novel patches of all time. Naturally, people were hoping Miazora would get a similar patch, given it's by the same company and writer as Kono Sora. Technically, as of this video, it does have an 18+ patch that's in progress by Snowy Ryujin, but we can't forget that a proper 18+ patch was properly announced and started, but dropped at least 2 times. The first one was by Infernoplex on Fua Novel, and the second by a previous translator of Snowy Ryujin. It doesn't help that there is currently a patch that machine translates just the 18+ content, but it reads so terribly, I generally don't recommend it unless you really just want to read Miazora as soon as possible with 18+ content. Next, I'm going to be talking about Umineko Gold project by Catbox Creative. While the main Umineko series does have a full translation, courtesy of Manga Gamer and Witch Hunt, Umineko Gold was a very special project intended to bring out a bunch of interesting features. For one, currently the PS3 graphics were planned to be used officially and not just a fan patch from the 07th mod. Secondly, there is a plan for an official English dub of the visual novel, a huge rarity for popular Japanese original visual novels. Third, there is going to be a Kickstarter, which I would assume would include limited Umineko merch, similar to how other visual novel Kickstarters generally go. Sadly, apparently an important person on the team got sick or something, and the Kickstarter just never started. For context, the announcement of this project was made in late 2018, and the project halted not even a few months later. Their last update was in mid-2019, with them basically saying communications are still happening, but no public updates for the time being. It is still possible for this to happen, but I think many visual novel fans just assume this project is dead now. The next visual novel I'm going to be talking about is Sayonara or Oshiete, sometimes called Sayoshi. I believe this is one of the more popular untranslated Denpa visual novels, which is basically a subgenre of horror, where the protagonists or major characters or the story just kinda go psychologically crazy. This was an interesting case where there actually was a fan translation released back in August of 2021. Apparently this full patch was unedited, but it read so horribly and got such negative feedback that the original translator straight up removed the link to the patch on VNDB and basically anywhere else public. So this patch might technically still be readable, but this is one of the few cases I can think of where a translation was apparently so bad that it straight up got cancelled and unavailable within a week or so. Next, I'll be talking about the Tsui no Sora remake. If you're a fan of Wonderful Everyday or Tsubihebe, there's actually a really old visual novel that Tsubihebe took storytelling elements from, and that was Tsui no Sora. The remake is very well received, heavily improving the graphics, continuing to stick itself out from Tsubihebe, and most importantly, actually being connected to Tsubihebe story-wise, written to be a kind of sequel of sorts, I believe. A few years ago, Gams, the head mod of the R Visual Novels subreddit, started a solo fan translation of Tsui no Sora remake. He got far enough to provide an English translation of a pretty big scene and show it off on YouTube. Sadly, due to some drama on Twitter, Gams dropped this translation and any other visual novel translation effort he was part of. The closest you'll get to seeing what the translation was like was both the previously mentioned preview video on YouTube and another YouTube video where Gams basically trolled reading the first part of his translation script over a let's play of the visual novel with purposely horrible quality. Next, I'll talk about Your Diary Plus. Your Diary is a visual novel developed by Cube and one of their more well-regarded visual novels. It was their second visual novel developed, and they've had many re-releases and even additional heroine routes in some ports of Your Diary. Hobbybox originally released an English translation on Steam and DMM. However, it read so obviously stilted and had awkward English that people generally accepted that it was a machine translation. Around 2019, when Shirobune was first taking off as an English localizer, one of their earliest low-key announcements was a retranslation of Your Diary Plus with better English. There were some updates around early to mid-2019 to assure the fans that it was still happening. Sadly, there have been zero updates since around 2020, and Shirobune has released a lot of English translations since then, none of them being a Your Diary retranslation. They've even translated a few visual novels from the developers' sister companies like Ninki Seiyu and Kamiyaba. I just assume this project is dead since Shirobune doesn't give updates anymore and there's zero indication or communication from them that it's still happening. Next, we're going to be talking about a triple whammy related to Soul Press. So it was somewhat recently revealed that Soul Press was a company that got FTB fortified, which essentially means that they are doing tax evasion and other money-related issues. The CEO, Zeviax, has also recently revealed to be on the run and unable to be contacted. This means that any manga, light novel, or visual novel license he had is all under his name and can't be transferred to anyone else directly. While many of Soul Press's licenses are very unlikely to be officially released with an English translation now, I wanted to talk about what I consider 3 of their most important ones that got basically screwed over. The first one is Nukitashi, the original Japanese name being Nukige mitai na shima ni sunderu watashi wa dou suru ii desu ka? Very long name. Anyway, this visual novel was developed by Kurupo, one of the few innovative eroge developers in Japan in recent years. While the premise seems like either a straight Nukige or even a parody of sex-focused visual novels, apparently there's a very solid plot with action and stuff. It's to the point a Nukitashi sequel was made, and Kuropo even had recently released a new visual novel called Hentai Prison, which is also very well received for its unique premise. Nukitashi being localized by Soul Press was a fairly big surprise announcement due to how new it was at the time. Next, I'll talk about Choose Your Mistress, original Japanese name Shitsuji ga Aruji o Erobu Toki, developed by Pizza. Soul Press actually released a visual novel by this company in My Fair Princess, which is a fairly average, kind of forgettable, rich school moege. However, I know some people who were kind of excited for Choose Your Mistress, since while it was a rich school setting again, there's going to be a bigger focus on heroines based on the S&M scale, or basically sadism and masochism. Finally, and what I personally considered the biggest sting, was the loss of Irotoridori no Sekai, or Iroseka, developed by Favorite. For the longest time, Hoshizora no Momoria was the only English translated visual novel, where's the fan discs by the way, Sekai project, developed by Favorite. While Hoshimemo was well received, Iroseka and its fan discs are some of the highest rated moege in Japan, so people were excited to see it coming to the West. Soul Press actually made a Kickstarter to translate this visual novel, and it barely reached its base goal on the last day, one of the visual novel Kickstarters close to the wire. That did mean the stretch goals of the fan disc weren't met and means they weren't guaranteed to get a translation, but at least the original could potentially do well. Sadly, since this translation was a Kickstarter, that means backers are most likely going to have zero way to get their funds back and not get any rewards both for any copy of the original base game or any potential physical goods. I almost didn't include Iroseka on this list because very recently, Nekonyan announced that they somehow saved the license, though they weren't able to divulge any details on how they even got it. My personal guess is that there is some kind of loophole since Favorite is releasing an HD version of Iroseka this year in Japan. Either way, that does mean a translation is actually coming out, thankfully. Sadly, this still overcounts as a big L for Soul Press because of the Kickstarter. That means that people who contributed to the Kickstarter would likely have to pay for this visual novel again through the Nekonyan release, and they won't be getting their physical goods on top of that. And there you have it. 10 visual novels that have had a visual novel English translation planned at one point, but never happened, or did happen, but just didn't hit the mark or failed in some way. What did you think of the visual novels that I put on this list? Were there any notable dropped visual novel translations that I didn't mention on this list that you care about? Feel free to leave a comment below.